Hi there, I'm Chris Stachiw.
And this is Father Malone.
And I'm Mike White.
Hey, everybody, let's laugh together. And we are the hosts of Dreams for Sale, the Twilight Zone 1985 podcast. Now, you may notice by the title of this episode, we are not actually going to be talking about Twilight Zone 1985 because by some magical synchronicity, Twilight Zone got rebooted while we're doing our podcast, and it was completely unintentional. So we're actually going to be talking about the first two episodes of the new show that are up on CBS Access, otherwise known as the streaming platform no one's using and everyone's just torrenting it. So we're going to talk about the first two episodes of the new show. However, before we get to that, I feel like there's a little bit of housekeeping that we need to do. I want to wish Mr. Mike White a happy birthday. We have never gotten to do this, to wish someone a happy birthday on a podcast recording on their birthday.
Aw, well, shucks, thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, happy birthday from me as well.
Aw, thank you.
So yeah, we're recording on your birthday, and so what better way than to celebrate with two episodes of The Twilight Zone, presented by Jordan Peele, but not written by Jordan Peele. So let's talk about the first episode, The Comedian.
Samir Wassan is an artist of great principle. A man who refuses to compromise his beliefs for a cheap joke. But tonight, he felt the rush of the limelight for the first time. Now, he'll have to decide what really matters to him when the laughter stops, and how much he's willing to give to the Twilight Zone.
It's directed by Owen Harris. The teleplay is written by Alex Rubens. It stars Kumail Nanjiani as a stand-up comic who starts making fun of his own life after meeting a grizzled comedian, like a grizzled famous comedian. So I'll kick this off. Pretty stock Twilight Zone episode. Not anything too outside of the box. It's a pretty solid first entry in a new show, but if you've seen the show before, it's not anything that's like particularly new. It's not a novel concept, as it were.
It's definitely not novel if you have seen Death Note.
Right?
No,
boy, that's a
good point.
Yeah, that is a very valid point. Is it? Jeez, yeah. I hadn't made that connection.
Yeah, it also felt to me like there was an episode of Tales from the Dark Side based on a Stephen King story called Word Processor of the Gods. This felt like a reversal of that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That was a really good one, too.
Yeah.
The whole conceit of this episode is that Kumail Nanjiani's character is given powers by Tracy Jordan, Liz Lemon. I mean, he's playing like a weird Tracy Jordan, Mr. Tracy Morgan is. And he's given these powers to change his own life and the world around him by mentioning people in his stand-up and making fun of them. And when he does that, they disappear. And, I mean, if you can imagine where this is going. I mean, there's like essentially one outcome here that the episode is going to go down because it is an episode of The Twilight Zone.
Yeah, it's not great. I was with the episode for a while. It is, we complain about the 85 podcast about episodes going too long when they're only like 22 episodes. This is at least a half an hour too long. The pilot, for some reason, is an hour long, as if we need to know more about this character or this conceit. So not only is when he starts doing his act and he's mentioning personal things, like he's getting big laughs now, and once he's mentioned somebody, they not only disappear, they cease to exist. No one has ever heard of them before or after. And one of my gripes with the episode seemed to be that now, he's getting more and more famous for his act because of this, but if he tries to redo the act, nobody finds it funny again. I assume because nobody, that person is no longer in existence, but I'm just wondering how he's continuing to get famous when the things he mentions no longer exist. Like, it was a weird disconnect there, for me anyway.
Yeah, it's a weird disconnect, and I think the audience is getting bigger, but it's not like a huge audience by the end. You know, and you would think like he would move out of Eddie's comedy shop or whatever and move into other venues. And I I don't know. Is it okay to skip around and do spoilers and stuff like that? And
look, if you're here, you want to hear us talk about the episode, so we're going to talk spoilers.
Right. And FYI, if you haven't seen this episode and you want to see it before we get into spoilers, it is available on YouTube. It was put up by CBS the other day. I don't know how long it's going to last up there, but it's there for now.
How gracious of them.
Yes. I thought that when he went in and started tearing up, there's this whole weird running joke about the apostrophe for Eddie's. When he tore up the apostrophe, I was just like, okay, he's going to get rid of the club. And then
Me too.
No other place to play. And like his whole comedy career is just done at that point. Okay, good. I'm glad I wasn't alone in that.
They made a big point of that and then nothing comes of it.
Yeah, I mean, why bring it back up? Like, that was the setup, right? Like, oh, I'm going to go out and mention this club. My whole career would disappear. Everyone will be back to normal and, like, happy ending. Sure.
Right. Yeah.
And the thing that I honestly was bothered by with this episode was the ending. Like, it almost felt like... And look, I don't know. These are just the first 2 episodes, and I'm kind of skipping a little bit to the next episode. But this show seems a little bit more mean-spirited than the original show. With like the way it treats its characters, because this story should have had and could have had a happy ending, and instead it goes for this weird Shining-esque ending that feels it feels really lame. If you've seen The Shining, you're like, that's where this was going? He's a part of the wall now? I mean, sure, but it's not, again, what this feels like. This doesn't feel like an original idea. This feels like an idea that's copped from like 8 different spots and mashed together into something that kind of can stand on its own, but ultimately feels like lesser than the sum of its parts.
Yeah, that strange Shining ending was definitely something weird. I think he buys his wallpaper at the same place where Rupert Pupkin buys his wallpaper at, and that's what I was totally reminded of with that opening. I was like, oh, this is like the King of Comedy, and I thought he was doing his stand-up act in front of this laughing audience because he is the worst stand-up comedian in the entire world. And I don't know why he doesn't realize that. Like, his whole Second Amendment shtick that he keeps trying to do is awful. And, I mean, it's better that he does disappear at the end, but by him disappearing, everybody else that he erased came back. And for a while, he was doing good works by erasing people. Like, the guy who, was raping girls and his abusive coach and all these people that were just terrible human beings, he was erasing them. So, yeah, it was really kind of strange. I'm trying to remember what I just was watching where someone erased someone else from somebody's memories. I think it was maybe a Star Trek or something. No, it was the Orville. They just had a scenario on the Orville where there was somebody living in the holodeck, and she ended up going with this other guy, and then the guy who was running the holodeck program erased that dude, and so her life completely changed. And so as I'm watching this a week later on Twilight Zone, I'm like, I just saw that. That is too weird.
Yeah, it's, like you said, it feels really, the whole conceit of this episode doesn't feel original. And it almost feels so generic and basic that it feels like this could have been on a show that was not Twilight Zone, but trying to be Twilight Zone. And that's kind of what this first episode feels like. It's like, it's beautifully shot. Marco Beltrami does a fantastic, the score is great, but it's so bland. And to Father Malone's point, it's like 30 minutes too long. Nobody cares about this character that much. I love Kumail Nanjiani. He's great as an actor and as a comedian in real life, but holy shit, he can't carry this episode on his own because it's just not that interesting.
No, and I do think the stand-up portion and where he's just sort of being the regular guy, he's fantastic. Who better to play a stand-up comedian than a stand-up comedian? But anytime he had to sort of emote, I was pulled out of it. He's not the best dramatic actor. No offense to him because I love him, but anytime he had to feel some emotion, I felt a little bit like he's just reaching or trying too hard. I don't know.
Which is surprising considering how good he was in The Big Sick, right?
Yeah. But then that was kind of based on his life, wasn't it?
Yeah, so it's just him again.
I think it's more of, the source material for him might be a bigger determinant than he himself, if that makes sense.
Right.
Well, no, to speak to the episode, sort of in general, like sort of as an allegory for creative people that they have to effectively abandon portions of their personal life and destroy whatever relationships they've had because the art is everything. Like, I really enjoyed that sort of being woven into the episode. I thought that was really good. And to speak to your point, Chris, where it seems a bit more mean-spirited than in the past. Like, why not just go for that at the end? Like, because they try to give us this happy ending where he erases himself for all of his misdeeds, and then everything resets, and that's fine. But you know what? Why not just go in the other direction and have him become the most famous comedian of all time, who is ruthless and is left with nothing? Like, I could have just as easily been satisfied with an ending where he's back at his little hovel or his palatial mansion at this point, and just completely alone because he has effectively murdered everyone in his life. Like, that could have been a little bit more 21st century Twilight Zone.
Right.
Yeah.
I would have appreciated if he had just essentially written the world out of existence.
Yeah, because he's on that trajectory. Like, they have him like, oh, you're going to go on TV, and that's like the third act kind of thing. Like, oh, you're going to be the on this TV show, and I was like, wow, he's going to get on that TV show, and he's going to start making fun of the American people, all your viewers. Wow, all the people that watch this show are really idiots, and here comes the laughter. And then that would be it, and everybody would disappear, or he would even go bigger than that and just wipe out everyone.
That was what I was expecting, but no, it ends up just being this kind of like dud ending. And on top of everything else, you have Dr. Kilpatrick, whose character is wasted. Like, there was an interesting thing you could have done with her character, and instead it's just, oh no, by the way, Tracy Jordan at the end of the episode is going to offer her the same thing he offered Kumail Nanjiani's character.
Yeah, and that's another thing that bugged me about the episode. We say this about the 85 show all the time. Like, we don't need that character. If we had just seen him being a terrible comic and he's doing his act and it's terrible and nobody is enjoying it, and then one day he's just fed up and angry and starts mentioning other things and they start laughing, like, that could have been in and of itself a good thing. Like, I didn't need this sort of magical character showing up to, like, give him the power to do so.
You left out the one word, the magical Negro character.
It was a magical Negro. I know.
It's a played out trope. Like, it's for a show that is trying to be as forward thinking as this one is. Really, show? The first episode of the show is going to that well? Come on. Really?
Yeah, that was a little weird. I mean, and it took him, we keep complaining about the length. It took him too long to realize that he had the power, and just, don't have him do it twice and figure it out. Have him do it once and figure it out. And, just there you go. You've cut down on like 10 minutes worth of stuff.
Yeah. They're not big on economy here.
But, I mean, again, I think that, and having read reviews online, I think we're in the minority here. I think a lot of people like this episode, but I also I genuinely wonder how many folks who are, like, really enjoying this episode have seen other episodes of The Twilight Zone. Because
probably not a ton.
Right. Which, I mean, not trying to say that we're sitting on our high horse as the smart guys in the room, but it's not that interesting of a premise if you have a base knowledge of the Twilight Zone outside of the 10 episodes that Simon Kinberg, whose opinion no one should listen to, and Jordan Peele said, like, these are the 10 episodes you should watch as a primer for this show.
Yeah, I'm very curious how many of these shows, too, and I know we'll talk about this more in a minute, but I'm curious how many of these shows are going to be remakes of previous shows.
Right, exactly. Because that's my other concern here.
Even the idea of, when I saw that this episode was called The Comedian, I was like, okay, The Comedian, I wonder if Rod Serling has done something like this. And he did do an episode of Playhouse 90 that was called The Comedian, or he co-wrote this episode or adapted a play for this episode. Does not have anything to do with it, but I was just like, oh gosh, is every single one of these going to be an adaptation of something Serling and company has already done?
You know what it actually reminded me of, and Father Malone will appreciate this, the Vault of Horror episode that we did on our Tales from the Crypt podcast, the artist segment felt very similar to this.
Yeah, very, very much.
Tom Baker, where he can paint things out of existence.
Yeah.
I can see that.
Yeah, not a new idea. And I don't know if they had, cut half an hour out of this and, sort of made some of these changes, been more economical, and given us a more powerful ending, then I could have enjoyed this episode more because I was with it for a while. But ultimately, it was just, a middling. If this were one of the 1985 episodes, we would be like, yeah, it was okay. It's not Shatter Day. And speaking of that, that's how you begin a series. This I could have seen coming somewhere in the middle of the series and been like, yeah, okay, that's a pretty solid episode, I guess. But if this is your opening salvo, I don't know.
Well, that's the crazy thing, right? Because that's the other thing I think we should talk about. You mentioned Shatter Day, which is the first episode of Twilight Zone 1985. Mentioned first episode of Tales from the Crypt, another anthology series. The first episode of that show is a strong, one of the, if not the best episode of the show. And like you said, this is the opening episode. I honest to God, I would have had them swap it.
Yeah, 100%. I'm not sure why they didn't begin with the next one.
Because the next one, the name alone is so insanely, nostalgic. It's been done every time they do anything Twilight Zone for the most part. That comes back in some form or fashion.
Yeah, and I was very surprised. Right now on IMDb, they do not have a Matheson credit. I was just like, come on, guys. At least they had it on the episode itself. If they hadn't, I think I would have thrown something through the TV. But it's just like, come on, guys. Let's get your shit together here.
So, is there anything else you guys want to talk about with this episode?
I want to mention one thing. This is probably for the whole series. I hated the credit sequence.
Felt a little too on the nose.
Oh, way on the nose. Let's traffic in the iconography of the original series. There's a way to do that and expand on it and stake your own claim, which is one of the things I love about the 85 series. It doesn't feel like it feels like the Twilight Zone, but hey, here's our version. This is what we're doing now. This just felt like, hey, remember the Twilight Zone? Here it is again.
Speaking of trafficking in nostalgia, how do we feel about Jordan Peele?
I actually liked him. I think he does a weird thing where he constantly he does a little bit of a pause and a look around before he says Twilight Zone, which feels a little odd. But no, I like him. I think he's a solid addition to the cast.
What did you think of Jordan Peele, Mike?
I don't mind the guy at all, and I thought he was doing a good job. But he does characters so often, so I was waiting for him to smile at the end or give a little "Hey, I gotcha" kind of thing. But yeah, I was absolutely fine with it.
Yeah, I'm actually glad he did not do that thing. I'm glad he did not sort of give us a wink that he's playing it straight, that he understands the sort of the power of the Rod Serling role.
He gives a little smirk, that's for sure. I'll say this much. You were talking about trafficking in nostalgia, Father Malone. I don't know if we needed an on-screen narrator. That, again, feels a little too on the nose for me. I like Jordan Peele. He's great. Honest to God, he's one of the best things about Hollywood right now. But, that's what made 85 so good, is that they didn't feel it necessary to be and here's someone else taking Rod Serling's place. And that's kind of what this feels like, and I don't think it's necessary. But at the same time, if this wasn't Jordan Peele's The Twilight Zone, which, by the way, again, the gigantic misnomer here about this show is that he is involved in a way that isn't just presenting it. And I'm not sure, and once we get to the end of this 10-episode run, if he writes an episode, which I hope he does. But my assumption was that he was going to be part of the creative driving force, and that's not the case in a way. He's sideways on it. He's a producer, but not the showrunner. And that was my assumption.
Yeah, and
well, I think with the next episode, he did write the story for Nightmare at 30,000 Feet. He is credited as one of the writers on it. So I think he is a little more creatively involved than we're saying. But yeah, at the same time, he's not running that show.
Yeah, and to agree with you, Father Malone, the whole idea of hey, let's do something different. I was with the 85 version, I was much happier. I never watched the version that Forrest Whitaker did, so I don't know if they were copying the original.
He's on screen.
He's on screen.
Yeah, he is on screen.
He is on screen, and even the credit sequence is an aping of the original. And but at least they're doing what I really enjoyed about the original Twilight Zone with Rod Serling is I always liked that the camera would sort of just pan over and there he was, like part of the story. With the Forrest Whitaker one, they would just sort of cut away to him in some sort of like spacey kind of environment and tell us about it. You could tell they just like filmed his segments like all in one day at like some other location. So I like that they've integrated Jordan Peele more into the show, and particularly with the next episode, the way they sort of got him on screen, I really liked.
I agree.
Samir Wassan learned the hard way that sometimes getting everything you want means losing everything you love. And after finally finding himself on the verge of becoming somebody, he chose instead to once again be a nobody. In the end, Samir's final encore is a show you can only buy a ticket to in the Twilight Zone.
Let's talk about the next episode, an episode that I mentioned earlier on in this show by accident, apparently, and I was corrected, and now I am right. We're talking about Nightmare at 30,000 feet.
It's 10,000 feet scarier.
Right? Whoa!
Settling in for a 13-hour transatlantic flight to a land rife with ancient mysteries is Justin Sanderson. Mr. Sanderson's occupation is to uncover unbiased truth. But with an hour left before certain doom, he must ask the right questions of the right people. Landing at the truth this time will require an unscheduled stopover in the Twilight Zone.
It's directed by Greg Yaitanes, written and developed by Jordan Peele and Marco Ramirez, and written by Marco Ramirez. Stars everyone's favorite dad, Adam Scott, as a man who has a problem with PTSD, and he is on a plane where he finds a podcast that may be telling what happens to the plane that he's on.
Where is he a dad? I only know him as a dick.
Well, he's like the dad dick. Like in what is it? Step Brothers, he's like the dickhead dad.
Oh.
I don't know, he's like getting to the point now where he's like older now, and like he's gonna get typecast more as like an older dad type. Like in this episode where I'm assuming he's like a dad kind of guy.
I wouldn't assume that he's a dad, especially since he left his girlfriend/wife to go to like a war zone. It seems like he's the globe-trotting, ne'er-do-well reporter guy, investigative reporter.
Sure. Okay. So he's not a dad,
Yeah, but he is a dick.
He is a dick. Boy, that was really bad. I thought this episode's conceit was interesting to really subvert what the expectations were going to be when we talk about the title being Nightmare at 30,000 feet, evoking Shatner and John Lithgow's versions of the episode. I'm not sure it hits completely, but I personally thought it was better than the last episode because it takes some chances with a source material that is so well known.
So in a situation like this, I can put myself in the main character's shoes a lot more than I could with the previous episode because I'm not a stand-up comedian, but I've flown on airplanes a time or two. And I also listen to podcasts, and I just kept thinking, okay, this guy is an investigative reporter. He's listening to this podcast. The podcast is 28 some minutes long. The flight, the podcast, it says when the flight is supposed to crash or the last known message. That puts it an hour later. So let's listen to the entire podcast and then go about our business. I don't know, so I was frustrated just at the way that this episode went, and I know that like goes against the entire way that this episode is built. Like, let's investigate while we're doing this and then find out that we're wrong. But I was just crawling out of my skin because there is a social contract on airplanes and he was breaking the social contract at all times. So I was just very uncomfortable with this episode.
Yeah, I feel 100% with you on that. I liked this, as you said, Chris, I liked the subversion of the expectations in this episode. I liked that they came up with this new sort of gremlin boogeyman that is the podcast itself. Like, that was very interesting to me. But at the same time, exactly, Mike, like, listen to the goddamn podcast beginning to end. Like, what are you doing? Like, he would listen to it and then go investigate something and then come back. Well, he didn't even take it with him, where he could have just had it in his pocket and, like, listening to it while he's going about his business. He had to keep coming back to the seat and, like, okay, well, I'll start it up again because that turned out to be a dead end. Like, it was just insane, like, the what they expected us to sort of follow. Plus, just as an aside, is there a thing where you can watch what the pilots are doing on any commercial aircraft in the world today? That was the most insane idiocy.
Sir. How dare you?
I've never heard of or seen such a thing. It is such
crazy. A thing that exists for this fucking episode and nothing else. It is fucking ballistic. Because if you could see what the pilots are doing, I have a friend who's a pilot, and he's like, most of the time we're just dicking around, like, just talking, like, fucking cares what they're doing.
Right.
It's like, you don't want to see how they make the food in the kitchen. Like, if you worked at a restaurant, you'd never want to eat there. It's like, I don't want to see what the pilots are doing. I just want to assume that they're taking their job seriously.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I'm sure if anything were actually going wrong, you definitely want to see the pilots in a panic mode, right?
Yeah.
Let me just switch over to the cockpit channel.
He's also the worst investigative journalist ever, because he keeps saying, like, well, I'm an investigative journalist and I realize that this person, like, he goes to the guy who ends up being the crazy guy and it's like, oh yeah, you're a pilot and, you're a good guy. Who's the air marshal? And he figures out, quote unquote, who the air marshal is, and he's wrong. And he goes to this part, he's wrong. And he's just continuously wrong. I'm just like, he's the worst guy in the world at figuring out who people are or what their motivation is.
Well, like, the other, the thing with the podcast thing being, I hadn't thought about that, but now that you guys mention it, yeah, it's fucking nuts how much of an idiot this guy is. But, like, I feel like that's the point of his character, is that he is kind of, like, completely disconnected from reality, that he's doing things the completely wrong way, which, again, maybe it's just a plot hole, maybe it's the episode being that smart. The thing that I appreciated about this episode so much is the way, is the idea that everyone survives somehow.
Wow.
Yeah.
What fucking universe? The Twilight Zone. That's right. So they all survive and they beat him to death. Like, what are you?
Yeah.
You wrote yourself into such a box that you had to really break the constructs of this universe.
Well,
so much that everyone survived crashing into the ocean. So much so that the plane is, like, vertical in the water. Okay.
They screwed up with two things. One, they had the preview for the next podcast on that podcast, and like, since the first one was such a hit, and I was just like, how do you know it's a hit? This is a podcast. It should have been like the next episode. Second one is they totally missed the one opportunity for comedy where you're listening to a really deadly serious true crime podcast, and then they slip into, like, and there's no better way than sending email than through MailChimp.com. Yeah.
Mail Kimp? Can I point something out, though, and to this episode's credit? How fucking smart is it they got Dan Carlin to do the podcast? Oh my God. That was
I don't know who that is.
Well, okay, so Dan Carlin does one of the more popular podcasts. He does Hardcore History, which is a amazing podcast series where he just talks about history and, like, in long form. Like, the podcasts are like 7 or 8 hours. It's a man after your heart and my heart, Mike. And I thought it was really smart that they got him to do the podcast on this show. Would it have been better if maybe they'd gotten, like, Sarah Koenig? Probably.
I don't know if the American public is ready for her voice.
I mean, they were enough for Serial.
That's true. I wasn't. I couldn't handle it.
They probably should have gotten John Lithgow to do it, actually.
Or
that would have been even better. Oh, wow.
Oh, my God. What a fucking missed opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
They did name Nicholas Lee's character Captain Donner, though, so
yeah,
wink there. Which, by the way, I'm always glad to see Nicholas Lee in anything. I mean, Krychek from the X-Files.
Krychek.
What is that guy up to these days? Not much.
Apparently, wait, and evidently, just from his presence, we now know that the show is filmed in Vancouver.
Right.
Right. And Glenn Morgan has something to do with this show, because who else is going to cast Nicholas Lee in something?
Yeah, exactly.
But I did like parts of this episode. I didn't like the fact that Chris Diamantopoulos' character is, like, they're making it seem like he doesn't exist, but he totally does. And I feel like that whole thing is very cheap and played out, where it's a Mr. Robot type thing, or any show where there's, oh, this is someone else. Like, I was expecting the twist in this episode to be that was, like, his split personality thing, and, like, he had taken control of the plane. And I'm glad they didn't do that. The pilot was actually a real person, but...
Well, speaking of that, now, that gentleman was a passenger on the plane, right? So, I guess he survived?
No, he died.
Okay, because when they say at the end, they say every passenger survived.
But here's the thing. So here's the thing, and again, this is the thing that, again, I can't tell if this is a plot hole or they know a little bit about the airline industry. In the airline industry, if you're a pilot, you can sit on a plane and you won't be on the thing.
Manifest?
Like the manifest.
Oh, the manifest.
Because you're just essentially, you're deadheading. You're deadheading, yeah. But I can't tell if that's like a plot hole or not. Like, did they just
Because it seems like he was a disgraced pilot, right?
Yeah.
Like, he had lost his job, and that's the reason he's going to bring the plane down in the first place. So he would have to buy his ticket and be on a list in order to get on.
Right, you would think. Unless he's just, like, still works for the airline at, like, a desk job. Again, I think it's a plot hole. I don't think that they were that smart.
Yeah, no, I think it's a problem.
Yeah, like, if they happened into anything, they happened into that. But, like, what random person watching that's going to be like, oh, yeah, pilots can just sit in on a plane for free at no cost and not be on the manifest. Like, who would know that?
Yeah, but then we also overthink stuff a lot, too.
Well, but I mean, that's one of the main
But they should be
parts of this
thinking more than
episode.
us.
True.
That's like the whole thing in this episode is like, is that a real person or not? Because
and it maybe should have been, because the conceit of the original two, the Shatner and then the George Miller directed Twilight Zone movie, was that he's seeing something that's not there, and I guess that's the podcast in this case. But like, I liked in the original one that this is a man just getting out of a sanitarium, so nobody believes him because he might just be crazy, and maybe that all happened in his head. So, I don't know. I missed a little bit of that element. Plus, I love monsters, so give me that monster back.
But hold on a second. In the original, they can't see the monster. However, in this episode, the air marshal listens to the podcast.
That's true.
Which, again, makes no sense, right?
Yeah. Yeah, because the first person that he talks to, he's like, listen to this. Can you hear this? And the guy's like, I don't want to get lice, man, and runs away. So I'm like, oh, is this going to be a thing?
He says, I don't want lice, bro.
Oh, okay.
I don't want lice, bro.
I was like, is this going to be a thing then, that nobody can hear this except for him? But then, and I was like waiting for his, quote unquote, invisible friend to listen to it and be like, holy shit, man. So then that would kind of, he would be the one person to validate that there was something there. And then you question that guy's even in existence.
Yeah. It is a very... The thing with the air marshal listening to it, that is one of the bigger points that bothers me, because you essentially killed your entire premise by letting that happen. Like, there's no point. Like,
yeah, she should have been like, I don't want to listen to this. I don't believe you, and just like, throw it away or something.
Or do like in Westworld and be like, doesn't sound like anything to me, it just sounds like static.
Right.
Right? Because...
Oh, and here's my favorite part of the entire episode, guys. The plane has crashed, wakes up on the beach, and then looks over and finds the MP3 player. Oh, okay. Total sense to me.
And the monster from the original episode.
Yeah.
It was funny. I've only seen the commercial, like just glanced at the commercial, because I really try not to expose myself to these things. So when I saw the commercial, I thought that was the creature's head. I didn't realize that was a doll of the creature. So I was just like, what is the creature's head doing washed up on the shore? That's kind of crazy. So then I kept waiting for the creature to show up in the episode.
So the real question now that I have, because now that we've opened this box with the creature on the beach, is what is the point of that? Are we saying that all these Twilight Zones take place in the same universe? Is it just like a cheap nostalgia gag?
Cheap nostalgia gag.
Okay.
Cheap nostalgia gag.
Maybe we don't need to do those, because the people that are watching this episode that know what that episode is originally probably are going to walk away from this episode going, yeah, this is a bunch of millennials writing this show that don't get it and are trying to like do their own thing with the original episode and kind of miss the mark. and just showing that little monster, the gremlin from the original episode, that's kind of what it feels like.
Yeah, and in that case, I've always felt this, like, when you're making a movie or TV show or anything, do not reference something that's better than you. It just that pulled me out and just made me think, like, yeah, you know what, that Shatter episode is really, really good, man. It's like, remember the movie Twister? At one point, they're at a drive-in, and The Shining is playing on the screen, and all I thought was, hey, I'd like to leave and go watch The Shining right now.
All I could think was how much I like Twister.
Yeah, see, they could have landed on the beach, and then the smoke monster would have shown up, and I'd be like, okay, this was better than Lost, at least.
Could have been.
The ending for this episode is so cheeseball. It's so dumb. It is a legitimately stupid ending that feels like it adds insult to injury with how dorky the way this thing plays out, because then he listens to it and he's like, last we left you. It's like, what? Now it's a different episode like of this podcast altogether? What? So the conceit is somehow the podcast is real, somehow they survived, and somehow they're going to beat him to death, even though they all survived, which I guess is supposed to be the end of civility, but, like...
Well, it was him who allowed the man into the cockpit, although they can't ever possibly know that because they weren't there when he was having the conversation to give the guy the code.
Right? Which makes, again, no sense. What the... Like, that's the problem.
Yeah, why are they beating him to death? Yeah.
Because he was just a pain in the ass? Was that it?
And they all decide to do it at once? Like,
yes.
You know, maybe if he had the invisible friend and it was actually just him the whole time and he was the one who tried to bring the plane down for whatever reason they could have built into it, then yeah, definitely beat him to death. But, like, you know, just because he was annoying while they were on the plane and when warning them that something like this was going to happen, that makes absolutely zero sense.
Right.
He's warning them that it's going to happen, but he ends up being the one who makes it happen. Bum, bum, bum. Wow, I've never seen that before. Man, oh god, these are not two great episodes to start this show out with. This is a fifth of the show, right?
This one could have been much, much better, and like it was on its way. I was really enjoying it for a while, but had they just made a couple of those changes, maybe had he listened to the entire podcast and then knew everything and then started investigating. I don't know, man. Like it's a solid misfire.
There are things they could have done with this, like you said, that are prescient. I mean, look, people are always paranoid when they get on the plane about people that don't look like them or what other people are doing. In this day and age, everybody's paranoid about terrorism on an airplane. So they could have steered farther into that angle, as opposed to being like, you know what kids really like these days? Podcasts. True crime podcasts. Like, and I'll give them credit. It's a novel idea. It is an interesting way to ground this episode in 2019. But
I totally agree. And yeah, I thought that's what they were going to lean into when the episode started and he's on his way to Yemen and it's just like so many Middle Eastern people on the plane. I was just like, okay, this is going to really be about xenophobia. But I don't think so.
And it could have been really interesting had he, like, the podcast and him singled out, a Middle Eastern person and kept blaming them, but then he ends up being the cause of it. Like, that could have been cool, but nope.
Yeah, and that they had audio from the flight inside of the podcast. Again, it's like, okay, it was just a little too much. Again, like, okay, you're an investigative journalist. You need to find out a little bit more about this. And I guess they must have been on the Wi-Fi and posted that somehow. So, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. And, the second time he got up and was disruptive was the time he was going to be lashed to his chair.
Right.
I mean...
Yeah. And by the way, what they actually would have done is they would have turned the fuck around, by the way. Because they were in the air for like an hour or two max. So, and it was like a 15-hour flight. They made a point of saying, a man on a 15-hour flight. Yeah, they would turn the fuck around. They would turn the fuck around, park his ass in a cop car, and send him back to the quote-unquote loony bin or wherever he came from.
Well, thank goodness it wasn't a United flight, because they would have beaten him within an inch of his life.
I want to go home. I need to go home. I'm a doctor. No, you're not. We're going to beat the shit out of you. At least he wasn't a dog and they didn't stick him in the overhead and smash him to death.
Ooh.
So, United Airlines, folks. fuck you and your animals.
Somehow we have gotten a really good PR flack on that because I haven't heard any stories about that in a couple of years, right?
Right, yeah, they've done a pretty good job of covering those up. But, you know, I again, like, I wanted to like this. I thought it was interesting, more interesting than the first episode. And it is a subversion of our kind of preconceived notions of what this was going to be. But I think ultimately, like you said, Father Malone, it is it's a heady misfire. They tried. They sure tried, but, you know, you don't get points for trying.
No, a beautiful failure.
So there's this thing with new shows now where I've been watching the Doom Patrol, which is not a good TV show by any stretch of the imagination. Cannot recommend it. I'm just a glutton for punishment. But they were doing like, okay, here's episode 1, here's episode 2. It's on that Warner Brothers network or whatever, the DC network. It was like, here's episode 1, here's episode 2, and we're going to slip you episode 3, and then they'll kind of carry on. With this, they're like, here's episode 1 and kind of episode 2, because the first one's an hour, this one's a half an hour, okay. And now they're going to wait 10 days until the next one drops, and it's just like, what are you guys doing? You should set yourself up to be like, this is going to be a weekly show, and you should know, start training your audience to say, this will be on at this particular time, or this will be available at this particular time. Because I'm like, okay, well, in a week on the 8th, I'll go ahead and, illegally download the 3rd episode. No, gotta wait till the 11th.
Or maybe just do like Netflix and release it all at once because it doesn't matter.
No, it doesn't matter at all, especially now in the world of Black Mirror. It's like, okay, I'm used to watching all this stuff at once, especially because there's no overarching storyline to it.
Yeah, no, the idea here that on a streaming service you're not going to just put everything out and you're going to piecemeal it out is absolutely idiotic. Like, I don't understand the point. It's not like you're really building up the audience anyways. CBS All Access or whatever the name of the streaming platform I torrent these episodes from is. But look, CBS doesn't get it any more than, like, Hulu does the same thing. But that's because they're run by these big, like, conglomerate cable channels.
Yeah,
they're not done. It's not Netflix. Netflix gets it. Just release everything.
Yeah.
Like, just fucking release it, because either people are into it and they're going to watch it all in one sitting, or they're not. Like,
why are we tuning in week after week when this is the new way to go in the world?
Yeah. And by the way, if we weren't doing this show and had the opportunity to watch these 2019 episodes presented themselves in a way that we could review it, I'm not sure I would keep watching after this episode. Like, these 2 episodes,
I might tune in one more. I'd give it a shot, but after that, no.
Yeah, I mean, it's these first 2 episodes have not been like the amazing return to form that I think they've been building this up to be.
This is not the Prime Minister having sex with a pig. That episode of Black Mirror guaranteed that I was going to watch at least 6 or 7 more episodes.
Still never seen it.
You're missing out? Question mark?
I mean, I know I'm missing out, but at the same time,
I don't know if you are or not. Black Mirror is an okay show with occasional moments of really goodness.
Yeah. My hope
that's any anthology series.
Right. Yeah. I mean, look at when we did Tales from the Crypt. Look at when we've done this. I mean, there have been more bad episodes to mediocre episodes of Twilight Zone 85 so far than there have been of like, yeah, fucking great.
But at least they were smart enough to start with their strongest and make you come back.
And, I'm just going to put this all on Simon Kinberg because that guy's a fucking clown. So, this is all Simon Kinberg's fault, and there you go. No, I'm just kidding. I think this is a problem that's indicative of shows trying to pay lip service to the nostalgia crowd while trying to do something different, and it's hard to balance the two. It really is. I mean, look at a lot of these shows that have come out that are like reboots or remakes or soft reboots of these, iconic franchises. I mean, even the X-Files, when it came back, tried to pay lip service to the fans of the original show while doing something different, and it failed spectacularly. And my hope for this is, because these are standalone episodes, is that it will have a couple good episodes that are like worth revisiting and talking about, but we're a fifth of the way through already with these 2 episodes, and neither one are like, I'm going to go revisit it or tell someone to watch it. Like, I'll just tell someone to watch the original Shatner episode.
Oh, I think that's a spectacular episode. Oh, I'm sorry, my phone's going crazy again. I think that segment of the Twilight Zone movie is easily the strongest, and anchored obviously by Lithgow's performance, where you get the sense of panic and terror that most people have on airplanes, even though they try not to show it. If I were to, I mean, I love the Shatner episode, but if you were to say, like, of the three to watch, I'd probably tell people to watch the Twilight Zone movie version with George Miller, like, at the top of his game. I think the ending of that particular one is a little muddle-headed because they show the ground crew, like, finding how everything is scarred up by this creature, and that sort of negates the quality of did this or did this not happen. But for the entire episode, it is super solid.
Yeah, that little shitty kid who is yelling at him about not smoking, she still is in my nightmares.
The fat cop behind him, and, I don't know, it just felt panicked and awful. Like, I mean, I remember that particular one more vividly than even the Shatner one. Yeah. I would go with that one.
Well, and the thing is about this episode versus those two is that the idea that there isn't is there real or is this not real, that gets lost in this episode. And it's way too spelled out for the audience. And you're beaten over the head with this is real. And I think that that's one of the biggest failings here, is you could have played up the aspect of someone else listening to the podcast and be like, there's nothing here, man. And that would have been a more interesting route to go than, like, I listened to it and you know what? The past is the past. Like, fuck you. Like, stop bringing that up, because that message doesn't ring true or even hit home. Like, come on.
Yeah, I'm very curious because the next episode, it definitely is paying some lip service to the other Shatner episode as far as being at the diner with that little devil head on the fortune teller machine. That's
Nick of
all
Time.
over. Yeah, that one's all over the trailer, but
I think it's probably just nostalgia lip service again.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, I think another nostalgia lip service. And, of any of the earlier episodes of the Twilight Zone 2 remake, Nick of Time is a fucking brilliant episode.
It's a great episode.
Literally, like, two characters in a diner with that machine. Like, it's tense and moving and interesting. You could do worse than try and lock that back into the people's consciousness.
I think the issue I'm having with this show already, just seeing the way they're handling the nostalgic aspects of just showing something isn't like, fuck you. Like, really, like, I don't understand why you think that that's something that anyone cares about.
Yeah.
Just show, oh, cool, there's the doll, the monster from the original as a doll. Okay, cool.
And you know what? If you're going to do that, like, why wait till the end? Yeah. Like, have it like he's sitting in the airport and a child is playing with the doll across from him, and just get it out of the way. Don't bring it up at that moment.
Yeah. And there were no shitty kids in this episode either, as far as I remember.
Not yet. They show Jacob Tremblay's character from the episode that is going to be later in this season, which if you watch the end of the comedian episode where it's like, this season on Twilight Zone, it has that thing where it shows Jacob Tremblay from Room is clearly playing, I forget, Bill Mooney's character from the episode where it's like the kid is turning people into stuff, and if you don't listen to him, he'll destroy you. That is clearly, they're going to do that again. And they show him on the cover of a magazine in this episode, which, by the way, other problem I'm having with this show, these things don't have to be interconnected. Like, Kumail Nanjiani's character was on the cover of the magazine in the airport.
Oh.
I don't know if you guys noticed that or not.
No.
But, like, so at the beginning, when Chris Diamopoulos' character walks up to Adam Scott, and he's like, oh, you're Justin Sanderson. Yeah. And then if you look, there's two more magazines on that rack. There's Kumail Nanjiani's character on, like, a variety-type magazine, and then Jacob Tremblay's character from an episode coming up that is, like, the one Mike mentioned. Which, like...
Well, that doesn't make any sense because Kumail Nanjiani's character no longer exists.
And that's my point, is I go back to the thing with the monster doll. Why do you have to interconnect? Who fucking cares? It's an anthology show. This isn't American Horror Story.
Thank God.
Right. Well, I actually kind of like that that is like a shared universe. Like, I don't have a problem with that, but actually, follow your own goddamn logic.
I have a problem with it exactly. I have a problem with it when it's like that.
Yeah. Had they put the female comedian on the cover of the magazine, like it was her time to shine, she hasn't wished herself out of existence yet, that would have been cooler.
That would have been better.
Or shown that or that she was successful and didn't do that shit, right? Yeah. it smacks of this whole like Marvel thing now where everything's got to connect back in on itself, and it's like, you don't have to do that. You don't. It's actually not necessary that things have to connect. Dark Universe, DC Universe. It's not as successful when someone else does it. It's just not. So we'll see if they continue with that, but I mean, like you said, the Nick of Time, the Devil bobblehead, it's there already, so they're clearly moving in that direction, so good for them. And in regards to some...
Well, that's when, Sam Jackson shows up at the end of that first episode, and he's just like, "Oh, Mr. Comedian, I'm putting together a team. I think you'd fit in well."
and in regards to things that are better than this, that are related to the original episode, the segment from the Treehouse of Horrors where The Simpsons does their version of Nightmare at 20,000 Feet is better than this. And that's just a comedic version of it.
Some of those Treehouse of Horrors are really effective.
Yeah, and that one where Bart is on the bus and it's the gremlin on the side of the bus is amazing. Yeah. And then I think like Hans Moleman takes it home as like his pet at the end or something to that effect. Like that's way more effective than this because it's playing to the source material but also doing it in a way that's funny and you can like laugh at the ridiculousness of it. This just feels like, oh, you know that thing? Well, we're going to do kind of that, but not really.
Well, also tell me that in the last... When did the original episode air? 50 years ago, maybe? But say 40, 50 years. In the last 40, 50 years, there haven't been more original short fiction that could be adapted for this. I mean, come on, guys. There's got to be some really killer stories out there that would be perfect for this.
Well, and that's the thing about 85 that I think is so great, is that they're adapting like short stories. It's not just going back to the well of the original show.
Exactly.
Like, fuck. Come on.
Go back to the original, the original writers, maybe. Some of those guys are still around. I did like there was a reference to Beaumont in this episode as well, and I was just like, oh, that's nice. It's a little Charles Beaumont reference.
Yeah, I like that as well. Even though he probably should have been named Matheson. I believe Richard Matheson wrote the original 20,000 Nightmare at 20,000 Feet.
100% correct.
But yeah, speaking to that, like the 85 series, I don't know the entire writing staff of this show, but those guys were goddamn heavy hitters when they put the 85 series together. And even as good as these writers are, they ended up adapting other people's stories.
Yeah.
So maybe they should be following that trend.
Well, like I was saying about Jordan Peele, I think he's a great writer. I think he's a good writer. He's going to be, hopefully he'll become a great writer. I mean, a movie like Us, I think, is where it falls short of the mark with kind of his genius with writing. But I don't know if 50 years from now we're going to be talking about Jordan Peele the same way we talk about Harlan Ellison. Or, right, and that's or like Rod Serling. Like 50 years from now we're going to be like, yeah, Jordan Peele, genre genius, Hitchcockian, influence on the genre. Like that's the kind, like you said, Mike, like that's the kind of stuff we should be coming back to the well for, not just ripping off the old episodes and being like, this is mine now, like because we put an extra 10,000 feet. Like, nope, that's not it. Sorry.
It's 10,000 feet better.
In his final moments, Justin Sanderson made the case that he did everything he could to avert disaster. But in the end, he was an investigative reporter unwilling to investigate himself until it was too late. Justin discovered that the flight path to hell is paved with good intentions, and it passes directly through the Twilight Zone.
On the next episode of Twilight Zone 1985...
Paladin of the Lost Hour and Teacher's Aid.
Yes, we get to see Adrienne Barbeau.
Yes, indeed.
Directed by B.W.L. Norton, did Teacher's Aid, and I'm very excited because I'm actually in talks to speak with him about More American Graffiti, which he also directed.
Ah, yes, I love that movie.
Might finally have to break your cherry for the projection booth, Father Malone.
Oh, I'll totally be on that episode. I like that movie as much as the original in some ways. I think it's like a really innovative flick.
I'm more excited for Paladin of the Lost Hour, which is directed by Alan Smithy, because that just smacks.
That guy has had such a career.
That is a prolific guy.
Yeah, Alan Smithy, Hollywood auteur.
Burn, Hollywood, burn.
He certainly has a wide range of topics that he has covered in his lengthy career.
Yeah, I mean, Hellraiser, Bloodline, Mighty Ducks the movie, the first Face-Off, I Love New York. I mean, holy shit, the guy he's the most prolific director in Hollywood.
Yeah, such a long career and totally all over the map as far as what he's done. Yeah, it's just been, he's had one hell of a ride.
One might say he will outlive all of us.
Indeed he will. I think they actually retired didn't they? They retired the name.
They switched it to a new name, but I don't know what that is.
Oh, let's find out.
Yeah.
Thomas Lee. That I think is what it is now. Thomas Lee.
Okay.
Until that episode, where can people find you, Father Malone?
You can find me on my YouTube channel, Odd5 Films, and my series You've Never Seen. And you can also hear me over on Chronicles from the Crypt, our podcast about the Tales from the Crypt television series.
Where can people find you, Mr. Mike White?
You can find me over at theprojectionboothpodcast.com, which is the website, wait for it, for the Projection Booth Podcast. And yeah, every week talking about a new, different, unusual film. And pretty soon you'll get to hear from Chris Stachiw talking about Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
A film that Mike doesn't like.
Yeah.
I've grown to appreciate it. I definitely didn't rag on it very much at all.
No, you did not. You did not. In your defense, you did not.
I didn't just take pot shots at stuff, so... and also, I do a podcast with you, Chris. I'm not sure if you're aware of it, but those conversations we have about once a month about Kolchak, the Night Stalker, I record those and put those out as a podcast over at kolchaktapes.com. So
you'll be hearing
I'm
from my
sure
lawyer.
I will.
You sneaky son of a bitch.
And you can find me on my podcast, The Culture Cast, where I am joined by a variety of folks to talk about movies. ? You can find that over at culturecast.com. And big thanks, as always, to Roxy Drive and Neutron Dreams for our intro-outro music. And make sure to check us out on the next episode of Dreams for Sale.